It's not an archetyping. It's not going to tell you who you are. What it's going to do is give you your personal life lessons. It's going to explain to you why things happen the way they do to you, what your personal issues, challenges, struggles are with other people, what your main patterns are.
I'm Casey Main, author, writer, and party girl turned spiritual junkie, and I'm dedicated to helping you better understand the most important and most complicated relationship you'll ever be in, the one you have with yourself. It's the only relationship that you're in for the entirety of your time here, and it affects every single aspect of your life. Yet it is the one most often overlooked. This podcast is here to help you explore that relationship, get to know yourself so you can accept yourself, heal yourself, and become a better version of yourself. So let's get to it. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Better You podcast. I am your host, Casey Main. As always, I want to start off by thanking you so much for being here, whether you've been following the podcast along for a while, almost a year. The podcast is about to turn 1 year old. Or if this is your first time listening, then welcome. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for checking us out. And I truly hope that you enjoyed this week's episode and dive back into other episodes. I've just been having so much fun doing this podcast, talked to so many amazing people and had a lot of really great conversations that all help us better understand our relationship with ourselves, which, as I state in the intro, is really, in my opinion, our most important relationship because it's the only one we're in from day one until we die. Literally, that is the only relationship we are in for the entirety of our lives. There's no breaking up with yourself. There's no moving away from yourself. That's it. You're stuck with yourself. And it's a complicated relationship. There's a lot we've got going on from childhood. There's a lot of habitual thinking and just kind of reactionary behavior. And so my true goal with this podcast is to help us all find ways to become more aware, more self-aware, more self-accepting, that whole, all the self-love stuff, because I think truly the only way we can ever change and better ourselves is to start by first accepting ourselves, which is kind of one of those catch-22s. You have to completely accept who you are and where you are, which I think a lot of that, it's easier to understand and accept where you are in life, the good and the bad, by looking at the past. So I think there is value in looking at the past, and then that helps you to accept the present. And then only by fully accepting the present are we able to make changes and move forward into the future. So I find that whole interplay super interesting. And so that is my overall goal with this podcast, and I hope I am accomplishing it. Quick look ahead to episodes that we've got coming up in the future. So we're going to have a conversation on breathwork, which I'm very excited about. Breathwork is something I don't personally do. I don't even really know that much about it. So I'm super excited to learn more about it, as well as some really interesting, very recent research that has come out showing the benefits of breathwork, specifically in terms of dealing with stress. And let's face it, these are stressful times. We have a whole movement for social justice. We have a whole pandemic going on. There's the economic implications of that, whether or not children are going back to school, if you're a parent, just so many things. So it's stressful, and to think that maybe we can tackle some of that stress just by doing some breathing exercises, I think could be super helpful for all of us. Also got a really interesting conversation lined up about how to create equality at home. And so that's really talking about you and your significant other and how you divvy up housework, the logistics of life, childcare, if you've got children. And this book looks at couples around the world and kind of how they're doing it. So I'm very excited about that conversation as well. And then I'm mostly excited because I hopefully finally, will be adding some diversity to the podcast guest lineup. It's been causing me anxiety about how just white my guest lineup is. And if you listen to the episode where I'm kind of exploring and and sharing my own journey of educating myself in terms of race in this country, in the United States, then you'll know that I'm doing a lot of self-work in that regards. And so when you look at the guests I've had on for almost a year now, it's absolutely primarily white and primarily white female. And I don't want that to be the case. I want to bring in more perspectives. I think that diversity in perspectives is incredibly valuable. And so I've got a couple conversations lined up with some more diverse guests to kind of just narrow down the topic. So I don't know what topics we're going to be discussing yet, but more diversity in my guest lineup is coming, and I'm very excited to be able to share that. All right, as far as this week's episode, this is a cool one. So we're talking about numerology, which is something I didn't really know anything about going into this conversation, but I've always been interested in. It is a little bit of a woo-woo one, but as you guys know, if you've been following the podcast for a while, you know I am all about all things woo-woo. I absolutely love it. And it's really cool stuff. So we talk a lot about like the life lessons that numerology can teach us, and then how this plays into like past lives and soul agreements or contracts. And if you have a hard time buying into that, or if you hear past lives and soul pods and that kind of stuff, and you're like, what? Then I definitely recommend reading the book, Many Lives, Many Masters. I mentioned it in this podcast. I think I've mentioned it in probably like 10 or 11 podcast episodes at this point in time. And I always recommend that book because it just totally blew my mind. I literally read it in a day, and I went from never even thinking about past lives, like never contemplating if I believed in it, just not on my radar at all. And then I read that book, and it was just like this huge aha moment. And I don't know, it just totally opened my mind in a spiritual sense. So if you haven't read that book yet, I definitely recommend that you do. I will link to it in the show notes so that you can easily find it. And we also mentioned, so we talk a little bit about the intersections of numerology and human design and gene keys. So we've done 2 episodes on those 2 different concepts. Both of them are really interesting. So if you haven't listened to those yet, I recommend that you do. One is episode 61. The one on human design is episode 61, so not that long ago. Understand and Embrace Your Uniqueness with Erin Claire Jones, who is very, very popular and well-respected in the human design world. And then if you go back a little bit further, episode 50, Listening to Life and the Keys in Your Genes with Paul Kuhn. And it's kind of funny because Paul, Erin, and Donnalynn all know each other. So I kind of got into this cool little circle of friends who all do super cool stuff. And with the human design episode, she gives a discount to order a blueprint, which is really a deep dive into your human design. I have ordered one, still waiting to get it. I cannot wait to dive into that. So make sure you check out that one and utilize that discount so you can get a blueprint into your human design. And in addition to that, today's guest, Donnalynn, who incorporates a lot of gene keys and I think even some human design into her individual numerology readings, is willing to give listeners, so all of you guys, a 10% discount on a private intuitive numerology session with her. So if you are interested in claiming that discount, then reach out to me and I will connect you with her. You can reach me at thebetteryouPodcast@gmail.com, and we will get you set up in a session with her with a 10% discount. So a little bit more about Donnalynn. She is an intuitive life coach, numerologist, and author of Life Lessons, Everything You Ever Wished You Had Learned in Kindergarten. Donnalynn is a decoder. She specializes in decoding people's lives as well as decoding the nature of reality. She is also an inspirational writer, columnist, and blogger. Her work has been featured on the Fox TV show The Real, Well+Good, GQ Magazine, Glamour, iHeart Radio Network, Observer, Thought Catalog, and Princeton Television. And in this episode, we discuss her story of how losing everything completely changed her direction in life and made her dedicated to helping others see their patterns and learn the lesson that life is showing them. The power of our intuition and how we tend to align with our head and logic instead of our intuition. How we are all born with a code that shows us our patterns, and how numerology can show us that code and the lessons that we are here to learn. How to calculate your life lessons, And if you get a little bit confused when we talk about this and have a hard time coming up with the numbers, reach out to me again at thebetteryoupodcast@gmail.com and I'll help you through it, because I didn't get it at first and then I've since figured it out. So just shoot me an email and I will help you. We also discussed the intersection of numerology, gene keys, and human design, the relationship between karma, soul contracts, and the life lessons you are here to learn. She gives an overview of several life lessons and then how each and every relationship in our lives has its own set of lessons. So really cool, interesting stuff. I'm very excited to share this one with you guys. And I do have a favor to ask. So the podcast turns 1 year old on July 30th. It was July 30th that I aired the first episode with my dear old friend Graham. That's actually a great episode and one of the most downloaded of all time. So if you haven't listened to that one, you can go back and you can hear me in my first attempt at a podcast interview. It's a great conversation with him. He talks about losing his mother at a very young and important age, because it was right around the time that he was realizing that he was gay, and we were growing up going to a very Catholic grade school into a Catholic high school. And so it's an incredible story. And I think it'd be really interesting for you to go back and listen to the very first one and then see hopefully how the podcast has grown, and I have hopefully grown as well. So, but my ask is that for the podcast birthday, that each and every one of you listening leave a rating and write a short review on whatever podcast app you are listening, especially if you're listening through the iTunes, the Apple Podcasts app, if you have an iPhone. Reviews really just help a lot in terms of growing the podcast and discoverability of new listeners. So that would be a great birthday present to me. Or if you'd rather share it on your socials, that's a great one too. Just post it on your story, tag me so that I see that you do it. So that is my birthday ask for the podcast, that you all help me grow it in some way, shape, or form, whether that be leaving a review or posting it to your socials. Either one would be super helpful. All right, so that's it. We're going to go ahead and jump into this conversation with Donnalynn. All right, well, I want to start with a little bit of your story and your background and how you got into this work, because it certainly is not something you've always been in. And I watched the video on your website where you gave a talk kind of your story and how you really kind of lost everything. So let's start there. And it can be a Cliff Notes version of that, but just to give everybody a feel for kind of what you've been through and the change your life has taken.
Sure, absolutely. So yeah, what I would say with that is that so my life looked completely different than it does now. I mean, I used to be 18 years in advertising, branding, creative marketing. I worked for all the top agencies, right? So I worked for Saatchi & Saatchi, Gray, Ogilvy and Mather, Interbrand. And I always thought, like I knew where my life was going and I thought I was in control of everything. And, I used to have this one pattern in relationships where I would I always used to give too much in my relationships, and somehow I would lose like all of the relationships. And I could never understand why. And then as I got older, I started realizing that I had a pattern of overgiving, overloving, and then the relationships would crumble. They'd run right out the door. And it was always in the back of my mind, but I never really focused on it until one day, 10 years ago, literally, in a really short period of time, I lost my full-time job when the magazine I worked at closed overnight. 300 of us lost our jobs. And then I lost the man I thought I was marrying to another woman, like 3 months before I thought I was marrying him. And then I lost my home because I was living with him. And I literally had $98 in my bank account. And I was like, what the hell just happened to me? And, I had intellectualized that I had this pattern in relationships, but I really just thought it was bad luck or I was picking the wrong guys, and I went to this gentleman I'd been studying with for years. And I was like, I don't understand what just happened. And he was like, Donnalynn, this was the same lesson and you missed it again. Same lesson. And I was like, what? And he was like, same lesson. You go, you figured it out. You come back, you tell me what you learned. I'm like, I don't even, and he threw me out of his office. I was so shocked And what I realized, and I had been studying this body of work for a long time. I had studied it for 16 years, this type of numerology in the background, right? Just with some of my mentors. It was a fun project. But I didn't realize that the longer it takes you to learn certain lessons, the harder these lessons get. And they're harder to discern because you would swear they're not the same lesson. And then also the consequences are higher. So now I literally found myself in the same position of the last 5 relationships, where I would be in a position where I don't have great boundaries. I don't have balance in my relationships. I give, and if they pull back, I give more. And I'm like a doormat. And I think, I'm a good person. I could give more. But because I have a lesson of the two, which is somebody who has an imbalance in relationships and they have a tendency to get their boundaries crossed. Because I have that, giving more doesn't get me more. It gets me walked on. Mm-hmm. And I saw this in 5 relationships, but I did nothing about it. And so now the universe dials up the heat. So now not only did I lose the relationship, I lost everything else around it. And that's just how it works, And so it took me, it took me a good year to get back up on my feet after that. And then I was like, right. And I started a coaching practice because, whatever company I was at, I was always the office psychologist. People were always in my office giving me their problems. And then everybody's like, you should be a therapist. And then I just decided, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to be a life coach because I am an intuitive. I have psychic gifts that I've had my whole life. And I play with this thing of numerology where I've used it. It used to be a party trick. And so I'm like, let me get certified as a coach. And so I brought numerology into it because I figured, right, I want to teach people. You don't have to lose your life to learn a lesson. You could just learn the lesson. Take it from me, And so I started the last 10 years changing people's lives because now they see the patterns. And when you see the pattern, you get the lesson and then you get out so that you don't lose that part of your life. Right? I learned the hard way.
Yes, I think as so many of us do. Okay, so I think I think it's interesting that you were already into numerology, just kind of as like a little side habit. Like, how did you first find it? Like, how did you find it and become interested in it, even though you weren't really like diving deep into it or necessarily even learning from it at the time? But like, how did you first find it?
So I was working with two mentors. These were people who were helping me cultivate my intuitive gifts and just how to read people because I have a gift of intuition. So I read people. So they were helping to cultivate that part of me. And so they guided me towards using a system of numerology to help me with that. They're like, if you actually calculate because everybody comes in with a code. We all have a code. Everything in the universe is mathematics. So they taught me how to decode people. They said, figure out their code. These are how the lessons and patterns run. And then you can add your intuition to it. So the intuition will make sense now that you know their patterning. You can help decode them. I basically help crack people's codes. But so they helped me with that.
Okay. I just have to ask because I'm just very curious. Like when you say like you had certain intuitive gifts, like what did that look like? What does that mean?
So I don't like to use the word psychic because it even weirds me out. And it's one of those new age words that I hate. But since I was 3, I have special gifts that I can see people. I can see and understand more about your life than I can my own. So it works great for my clients. Doesn't work so great for me. And so I get a lot of information, but it helps me to actually derive a code for people so that I can put that information into some sort of format so I can help them with it.
Okay. So this is just, I'm kind of now going down on a little sidetrack here, but how did you know like what you were picking up on and like seeing in other people wasn't normal? Like, how did you know that was a little bit extra than what most people were able to pick up on in terms of reading others?
So I think it probably culminated when I was 14. My 7-year-old brother, he woke up one morning with 107 fever and he died 24 hours later. And my whole family was shocked. It was spinal meningitis and nobody caught it. So it devastated my family and it devastated all of us, and it sort of shut me down. But what I didn't realize, Casey, is that when he was gone, I didn't realize that he could still be there. Like, he would show up and I'd be like, oh my God, what are you doing? Like, I thought you were dead. And he was like, no. And he's 7. And he was like, no, that's why I came back to tell you. He's like, it doesn't end. And he was like, there's a journey you're going to take, but it doesn't end. And I was like, what is happening? I thought I was losing my mind because I kept seeing him. And so I couldn't tell my family because they thought I was absolutely nuts. And so I was like, okay. So I knew I had gifts earlier on, and then I started getting information from him. And so things just started developing. So I realized, okay, so I'm, I guess, what they call a psychic. But I hated that word, and I'm somebody who's like, I'm a business person. I have an MBA, and it's like, I don't feed that part of me, right? And so I just started integrating it as I got older, but now I've integrated it into my career in a way that's digestible for me, because I think for a while I fought it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just, you're so right. Like I don't know, as a society, like words like psychic and even intuitive to a certain extent, like we don't value those words, and we're all kind of brought up thinking it's all like a little bit crazy. So like I even have like an aversion to that word, but like you're telling that story and I get like goosebumps, and I think back to things in my childhood, weird little things that happened. But I don't know, I guess on some level I think we all have these special abilities that we just kind of repress and ignore because they're considered crazy or woo woo or too new age or whatever by, in the masculine energy world that we've been living in for quite some time now. But maybe that will all change.
Totally. No, we all have this gift. It's a gift of your intuition. Your intuition is your connection to your higher self. And it's always, always speaking to you through, like I said, like that word, it's through your intuition, through your feeling. Sometimes you're like, oh, I don't know, I kind of want to just go here. And you don't know why. It doesn't make sense. But when you go there, you're actually in alignment with your higher self. You're in alignment with your soul. And that's what's right. And so when you align with yourself, you'll get downloads of wisdom for yourself and for other people. If I'm not in a great frame of mind, I can't sit with a client because I'm not going to align with myself to be able to download info for them. So, but we all have this. We just don't listen to it. We don't trust ourselves. We go into our head. We default to the head and we do the math and we do what makes sense because it's logical. But most of the time that takes us off our path. You take this job not because you love it or have a passion for it, but it's the next step. It's the next promotion. It's more money. I need the health insurance. I hate what I'm doing, but maybe one day down the road I'll change it. Whereas you really secretly just want to be a jewelry designer and you could do it all day and you love it more than life itself, but you don't give yourself a chance to do it because you don't believe that you can do it. And so you forego your intuition. We never listen to it because we say it doesn't make sense. But I tell my clients, especially when it doesn't make sense, that's when you have to do it. You have to trust.
Yeah, I believe that. I buy into it totally, but it is so hard to do. And even I think if you're on this spiritual path and consider yourself a spiritual person, like as I do. And so I fully believe, okay, if you just even think about it logically, like everything is energy. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. So therefore, like everything is some form of energy and it only changes forms, which then if you think about what that actually means, that really does mean like we are all connected in a very real way to absolutely everything in this universe. Like it's all connected. So if you start to like go down that road, you understand, oh, okay, so I am connected to everyone around me, the world around me, different levels of consciousness, all this stuff. But then yet still even like being able to intellectualize that, it's like there's a difference between kind of knowing it and believing it and then like fully knowing it and accepting it and listening to it, especially when it comes to like big decisions in our life.
Totally. I mean, it's our fail safe that we default to the head because we figure if it's logical and we do the math and it makes sense, then that's the right thing. But that's never the right thing. And people spend decades making wrong decisions that they force to be right. They force themselves to make the decisions that don't, that, if they don't feel right, but they force themselves to do it because it just seems like it makes sense, but it doesn't make sense. It's not the way it's supposed to be. When you listen to what feels right for you, even if it doesn't make sense, it always, always, always leads you to the right place. Always.
Yeah. And I think that that's a key word right there, like what feels right versus what our thoughts are. Because, I could say I've got like a lot of little voices in my head, things, parts of me saying, go for this, do this, you can do this. Other parts being like, no, that's a terrible idea. Like, you're running out of money, fear-based, all this kind of stuff. And it's like, all right, which voice do you listen to? But that's all like thoughts versus like the feeling and the getting quiet and really feeling it. So I think it's just, I don't know, it's just so hard. But what I like about this concept of numerology, and then ironically, it is then going back to like numbers, which are considered very logical. Like the numbers, people could argue like numbers are the ones that like, don't lie.
Yeah, I mean, they could be proven. It's math. If you're going to do the math, exactly. Do the numbers. Yeah, it's a quantum code.
So for those of us who don't know anything about numerology, like let's start at a high level of like what is it?
So everything in the universe comes down to numbers, mathematics, right? So Albert Einstein understood this. NASA understands this. We live in a quantum field. Everything is a number. Everything is an equation. So we can literally decode our lives by an equation. And the equation is the moment of your birth. The moment you incarnate through the interface of astrology onto this planet, that moment of incarnation gives you an equation. And that is your personal equation. So it's the birth date and the time. And it depends where on the planet you are. So you want those characteristics. And so all those numbers are important. And so they give you an equation. And really, for the easiest way, I mean, we can go so deep in numerology, but for today's purposes, all you're really looking at is the actual birth date. And you add up the numbers from left to right, every single digit. And the reason we do this is because you want to dial down that equation to the final 3 or 4 numbers. And once you get those 3 or 4 numbers, because I don't look at numerology the way everyone looks at it, this is a very special form of numerology. It's not an archetyping. It's not going to tell you who you are. What it's going to do is give you your personal life lessons. It's going to explain to you why things happen the way they do to you, what your personal issues, challenges, struggles are with other people, what your main patterns are. And so for me, so actually, let's look at yours. I won't give personal information, but your numbers are 32/5. Why? Because when I take your birth date and I add up every single number, one number at a time, moving from left to right, I boil it all the way down and I get a 32. So then I go I want to distill it down to one number. So I go 3 plus 2 equals 5. So I go 32/5. If I had a 35, it would be 35/8, right?
Okay.
If it was a 42, it would be 42/6. So then those 3 numbers, so for you, those 3 numbers tell me that you have lessons in the category of 3, in the category of 2, and in the category of 5. Now, each lesson is like an onion. There's so many different layers. There's a general context, but there's so many different layers to these lessons. And these lessons are going to show up differently depending on how old you are, how much progress you've made on the lesson, who you're dancing with, right? These lessons may show up slightly differently, but they're always the same lessons. Always.
Okay. And so I'm all right sharing my birthday so people can maybe figure out how you got to because getting to the 5, I think, is easy. It's the 32 that trips me up a little bit. So my birthday's May 14th, 1984. So 5 plus 1 plus 4 plus 1 plus 9 plus 8 plus 4, whatever that equals.
So yeah, you do every single number across. So I forget the birth date again, but you do every single number all the way across, right? And you do it one number at a time. So you're going to do the first, so it was May, what was it again?
14.
Yeah. So 5 plus 1 is going to be 6. You drop the 6 down. 6 plus 4 is going to be 10. You drop the next number down. You do one number at a time, moving from left to right. So what you do is you write every single number at the top in one equation. That's your master equation. So 5 plus, you just string all the numbers across individually with a plus sign. And then you move from left to right and you drop the number down and then add the next number. So once you get to the end, after you come all the way down, you're going to have a 32.
Gotcha. Okay. And then 3 plus 2 is 5.
Exactly. And those are your 3 life lessons. So the only thing about the 32-5, each of those lessons are important. They're all equal emphasis. It's just that the 3 and 2, all the numbers to the left of the slash, they get seeded earlier in childhood. So you might see those patterns show up earlier in life, but when you come across the number to the right of the slash, that number is going to show up pretty much in young adulthood. So anytime after your Saturn return, which is between 29 and 30, then you'll really be in that period. But all of us are working on all of these lessons all the time. So.
Okay. All right, good. That was going to be my next question. It's kind of what's the meaning of the slash between? But okay, so the 3 and the 2 are lessons I was kind of working on earlier in life.
They would show up earlier. You'd see them in childhood. You might see them with your parents, but they tend to get seeded earlier. Yeah. Okay.
And then the 5 to the right of the slash is after my Saturn return. That's then kind of when that lesson shows up.
Yeah, that's a general rule of thumb. It depends on how, if you got your 3 and 2 when you were 10 years old and you're like, I'm on this, I'm on fire, then your 5 will start earlier. It just depends on where you are,
I definitely did.
You're like the grade school wizard with wisdom,
No, definitely not. Okay. So what happens then? Like, do we always overcome or learn these lessons within this lifetime? Like, I understand it that they continue to repeat until we learn it, and then they get, as you said, have like bigger consequences and bigger.
Get harder. Yeah.
What happens when we learn them?
So these lessons are never going to go away, Casey, because you make soul contracts with other soulmates from other lives to help you learn these lessons. So this is what you're here for. So they never go away. They just get easier, depending on how much work you've made. So you might come up against a 2, right? Which is the balance and boundaries. That's the doormat lesson. You have to be careful not to overgive or undergive. You're somebody who has to find the balance in all of your relationships. And so you really have to do that. And if you have so many relationships where you're coming in and you find the balance by setting boundaries, if you're very good articulating your boundaries with people, but 3 is about self-expression, and you're a light worker, so you've got to express positively. How you set those boundaries, you have to do it in a way people can hear you. That's a bit of a catch. So if you start doing it, it could be hard because your boundary could be like, get the F out.
I know.
But if you do that, you're going to sink your 3 because your 3 is about positive self-expression. So it's a little bit, 3 and 2 together is a little bit of a setup.
Every time I do one of these types of readings, I learn that there's some kind of setup for me. So my human design with Erin, who I know you're good friends with, I have like a very strong mind, but then I'm supposed to make decisions from my gut. Like my mind can talk myself into anything, and I'm supposed to, not my gut, my intuition. And then I did the Gene Keys reading with, I'm not sure if you know Paul as well.
I know Paul very well.
Yeah. And he talked like, I've got all these like double whammies of learning this lesson of, now I'm totally blanking, rejection. It's like I come into this world with a lesson of rejection. I've got to learn. I pick up lessons of rejection. It's like every time I do one of these, I learn like, oh yeah.
And so these systems, so human design, Gene Keys, and numerology, they're all pretty much one and the same because I use Gene Keys in my readings as well because it's a deeper level of numerology. But your rejection is going to be part of that too because 2s have a need. They want to be liked. but they have to learn how to work in cooperation with people to find balance, because their relationships are going to be a little imbalanced. So what they tend to do is they either overgive, overlove, compromise themselves, then they get themselves taken for granted, taken advantage of, or they work, they either under cooperate and they get resentful and they shut down and they give nothing. But the relationships are still imbalanced. So rejection, if twos don't like getting rejected. So they're going to keep overgiving and overloving. They have a tendency to do that because they don't want to lose the relationship. And so they can,
like 100%. That is 100% my relationship history. And like pretty much all from my first love, like through all my relationships up into my early 30s. And it wasn't until I had kind of my little spiritual awakening and wrote my book and really looked at these patterns is when I started to see the pattern. And I saw it as, or at least this is how I articulated it to myself. Like, I keep ending up in these relationships with men who aren't choosing me, but it's like I was never choosing myself.
Totally.
That falls into like setting boundaries, and that I would always just give and give and give and never set any boundaries and completely lose myself in the relationship. And then they would leave.
And twos can't do that, because if you give and give and give, twos have to work in cooperation. They can't over cooperate and they can't under cooperate. They have to come in with a healthy boundary or they lose everything. They need to learn how to be of service, not a servant. But so the rejection issues going in your keys, they're going to speak to that too. They're in that category. That's why I do the gene keys lately. I've been using it with numerology because everything is a binary code. So if I know you're 32.5, I'm going to be able to guess pretty much with almost 80% accuracy, at least 4 of your 11 gene keys, because they're all codes.
Right.
They're all codes.
Which even gives them all even further validation that they're all kind of saying the same thing in different ways. So it's kind of like which one really speaks to you. And like you said, like makes it more digestible, because this stuff I still understand, even though I just freaking love it and buy into all of it, that it's a little out there and a little woo woo for some people. But I think if in whatever format it makes sense to you, you're going to eventually reach the same information because our coding is our coding. And
it's mathematics. It can be proven. It's mathematics. The numbers stand for something. The numbers are so powerful, Okay,
so I want to go through a little bit more of the lessons just to give people an idea of what they are and in case they know their numbers. But first, I'm curious because I love that you mentioned like we make soul contracts with different souls, and we're kind of, I always like to call them like our soul pods, and like we kind of incarnate in these lives together, and it's like, here, I'll help you learn this, blah, blah, blah. So, but are you telling me, so like in my life in this go round, like this round of Earth School, as Oprah calls it, my 32.5, those are my lessons, and like I'll never fully learn them. I'm just working on them. Or my bigger journey, my multiple lives journey, I'm working on these 3 things.
So there's different things. There's one, we're looking at our human life here on this planet. That's your 3rd dimensional human life. Once you start going into the multidimensional existence, I'm going to put the multidimensional existence out here for a second, because the human life is what I concentrate on, because we're here to learn. This Earth is an experiment. It's a huge experiment. It was initially an experiment to see if beings from different civilizations could coexist peacefully, take a life as a human, and all coexist peacefully. And that's what this experiment is about. So you've got, you literally can have different races who are warring factions in the cosmos being a human here, and to see how they get along. I mean, that's what, at its essence, that's what it was about. And free will, learning free will. Like we can be, do, or have anything we want. We have choice. That's the beauty. We can create our realities. And so the problem is we get trapped here with karma. Because if you and I are friends, and then I do something to you and I really hurt you, Casey, I do something to you. Now I've got karma with you. So I'm kind of bound to you whether I want to or not. So if I don't use the balance of this lifetime to work through that karma, I'm going to have to come back and reincarnate with you in another capacity somewhere else on the planet in some other version of the timeline. But I can't leave this planet until I clear that up. So I can't go home. I've lived other lifetimes in Syria, so I would love to go home, but I can't until I clear up these karmic contracts. So the life lessons, the numerology at the point of your birth, which is your equation, that's when you incarnate, right? That equation is going to tell you the contracts that you're holding. and the karma, the patterns that you have with other people. So every time you feel triggered, ding, 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 you're on the board, you're basically on board with a life lesson. Somebody's triggering you. It could very well be a contract. And so you can't, the first thing you're like, so we all have our own buttons. So you've got a 3, a 2, and a 5 button, and it's your partner's job. It's your best friend's job. It's your mother's job to push those buttons. So your stuff comes up and it's not latent and hidden anymore. So it comes up so that you handle it. But then the first thing we want to do is scream at the other person. You made me so mad. I'm so mad. You pressed my buttons. But like, those buttons are yours to be pressed. That's your work. That's what you're here for. Anybody who's doing well doesn't let their buttons get pressed. And they know when they're going to get pressed. And they're like, oh, you're trying to press my buttons. Interesting. And you don't suppress it. You just move through it.
So I love that. And I buy into it 100%. And it's really helped me. And I had one of these, I don't know, kind of big tests, I guess, or just a funny thing happened this past week. And it wasn't funny at the time, but it was funny as I'm reading through this explanation of me as a 3-2-5, and kind of the one of the things is that I've got to learn to, express myself and my true emotions and all this stuff. And I totally had one of these moments this past weekend where, and God love my partner, because he just completely called me out, as he's supposed to do, and kind of that I wasn't speaking up. Like, I wasn't sharing my emotions. I was kind of like shutting down and getting quiet, and he just completely called me out. And it was super frustrating at the time. But while it was happening, rather than get upset, I thought, I'm like, okay, oh, wow. Like they say, relationships are a mirror. Like you're 100% mirroring back to me, like totally what I preach, but now I'm not practicing. And like, I need,
take my advice. I'm not using it.
Totally. And he totally called me out. And so then to read this, that's one of my things. I'm like, okay, yeah, he totally pressed that button this weekend, like for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 3, that's your 3. So threes have a voice. 3s have to speak up. First of all, they're light workers. So they're beautiful because they're here to inspire, uplift, and motivate people. The lesson is enlightenment and expression. So they're light workers at the highest version, but then they have to express that light to the world. So they have to express it, and I'll just say quickly, in 3 ways. 1, they have to do the right work because it's got to be an expression of who they are. Then they have to express themselves through their day-to-day communication, positively, not negatively. Mm-hmm. Their words have to pull people up. If their words pull people down, it's a problem. So 3s have to have these difficult conversations with people. They have to talk to people in a way where people can hear them and where people feel inspired to work with them to make change. So they have to really challenge themselves, because most of the times they're going to speak negatively, which means they're either going to argue, criticize, judge, complain, whine, or, Casey, they won't speak at all. They'll just stuff it down. That's negative expression. I'm not going to say this to my partner. It's going to be a fight. Stuff it down, stuff it down. I can't talk to my mom about this. She won't understand. Stuff it down, until they just explode. 3s don't have a choice. Their lesson is to speak up. They always, always have to speak. So the mantra is really, if you don't speak, you don't get what you don't ask for. Other numbers can get away with it. Other numbers can like insinuate that they want something or hint around, but they don't actually have to come out and ask for it. A 3 has to ask for it. If a 3 doesn't ask, they don't get, because it's their lesson.
And that is the catch, because so then it's like, I'm supposed to always be speaking up, yet I have this crazy fear of rejection and don't know how to set boundaries.
Exactly. It's a perfect setup. So the 2 has to draw the boundary to find the balance. The 2 literally has to say, this is my boundary. So I always say, the 2s have to be like, here's my line. Meet me at the line, or you cannot dance with me. This is my line. But the way they express that line has to be positively, not negatively. Because they can't express it in a seething fight, screaming and yelling, because then they've defeated the purpose. They're at the lower side of the 3 and they're demotivating people, which is not what they're on the planet to do. But 3s also have to express their emotions and feelings. So it makes romantic relationships a little challenging, because 3s have to speak up about like the things they don't want to talk about. Like, where's this relationship? Are we going to get married? Let's talk about sex, because like, this isn't what I want. Like, and 3s are like, what? I don't want to talk.
Yeah. And I laughed as I read, I think this was part of the twos, that we kind of oscillate between this unhealthy dependence and independence in relationships. And I think that if I look at it, especially in my 20s, there was a lot of that. If I was speaking up on my emotions and sharing, it was negative, and it was in a, you're not giving me this, you're not doing this, blah, blah, blah. I've since turned the corner and recognized, like, it's not about what other people are not giving to me. It's more bring it around from a lens of myself, and I don't know, I'm still trying to process all this out loud, but it's like now, because I'm aware and very sensitive to being negative and like pointing fingers, I think I live more in that don't say anything, thinking that's the higher choice.
And it's not. It's not with
speaking up.
Totally. For the 3, you don't have a choice, darling. Threes must speak, but they have to learn to speak positively, not negatively. So if they push it down, no expression at all is negative expression. And negative expression is also negatively expressing. But so most 3s either it's easy just to shut down because they don't want to say the wrong thing, but that's also wrong.
Yeah.
So I always tell my 3s, this is a good way to look at it. If you have a 3, you have to learn how to speak kindly, constructively, and compassionately. And then your work is done. It doesn't matter how that person takes it. You've scored on the lesson. It doesn't matter what they do. You're done. Right?
So pretty much I have to confront every uncomfortable conversation.
Oh my God, every single one. And so guess what? You're going to get, every person you attract is going to be more complicated. There's going to be another underlying issue that you're going to have to speak up, and you're not going to want to do it. So I tell people, get these lessons. First of all, get them early. Get them in your 20s and 30s. Do not get these lessons in your 40s, 50s, and 60s, because they're going to pummel you. Yeah. And then secondly,
you're already thinking about it.
I know. So get them early, and then, get them also at work, get them with your family, get them with friendships. Do not have to get these lessons in love, because they are extremely painful, because that's where you're the most vulnerable. It is where you're going to learn the most, because you're so open. Your heart, if you're in the relationship properly, you're loving and your heart's open, so you get devastated. But you're going to learn quickly. But that's the difference between transitional soulmates and primary soulmates. Everybody's like, they come to me and they're like, oh my God, Donnalynn, I met my soulmate. He's amazing. I'm like, and I'm thinking, oh yeah, that's your soulmate, all right. Oh yeah, this one's going to take you for a ride, because it's a transitional. And those are the hardest ones for us, because they're the ones that we're so chemically attracted to. The chemistry's off the charts. And there's high highs and low lows. There's a lot of emotional chaos. It's like you never know what's going to happen. Like, are they going to call back? Is there somebody else? What's going on? And it's like, that's never a real relationship. That's always a lesson.
Mm-hmm.
The primary soulmate, those are the ones you have the soul contract with to marry and have kids. So those are just easier relationships. They are more harmonious. They're more balanced. It's like your best friend, right? Like you're still physically attracted to them, but the sex is usually not off the charts, because it's not the leading connection. Because this is the relationship that takes you into the rest of your life. So, other connections have to be deeper, like friendship, spirituality, because it's going to be forever. Whereas transitionals, it's first and foremost physical. Because think about it. There has to be something that keeps you in that torture. Right?
Yeah.
So that physical connection is the glue that keeps you stuck in that lesson until you're ready to get out of it.
Okay. Yes. Okay. All right. So we've talked about 2 and 3 a little bit, because those are mine. Let's touch on a couple others. So let's start with 1. This one looks kind of cool. Creativity and confidence.
Yeah. So these are the essence of creative. These are the visionaries. These are the people, they're the most highly creative people on the planet. But, you can remember, these are lessons. So you can be a creative person and not have the lesson of a 1. If you have the lesson of a 1, it means that your creativity is connected to your life lesson. Your lesson is that creativity. So you have to know how to move it through your body. It has to flow. So the hope is how you're being creative. So it's either your life's work or your hobby, but it's got to move. It's intense energy. Creative energy makes you super intense. If it gets blocked because you're not doing your creative energy, you're not using creative energy, it's going to break down into high levels of insecurity and or potential addiction, because it's intense energy when it gets blocked. So the insecurity is either I hide and I run and I'm fearful, or it goes the other way and I overcompensate with ego. Like I'm a belligerent ego maniac jerk. Like Trump, he is a one. His insecurity is off the charts. It's a creative energy that's blocked. So he feels like he has something to prove. Yeah. And then addiction, you can fall into patterns of addiction, which could be anything as crazy as drugs and alcohol, or it could be just any mind-numbing pattern of behavior just so you don't have to feel. So overeating, oversleeping, Instagram, scrolling, video binging, anything, just so you don't feel.
Yeah, I read that, I can't remember which book this was in. I want to say it was in Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic. I think it was this one, where she talks about how a lot of really creative people that they turn to drugs and alcohol because that download of that energy, creative energy, is so intense that a lot of times, like if you haven't done kind of your own work and kind of cleaned up shop in your life to be able to handle that energy, then it's like it's too much. And so that's why so many incredible artists were always performing on some kind of intoxicated level.
Yeah, that was a beautiful example because, that is exactly what happens. At the highest high, you're looking at like a Mozart or a Michelangelo, but at the lowest low, it literally could be like an out-of-work artist on the street with an alcohol problem. Mm-hmm. And then you could look at somebody like Steve Jobs, highly, highly, highly creative. Now, the higher up he got, he wasn't always able, he was running a company, so he wasn't always able to be creative. And so the insecurity comes in. And if you talk to anybody who worked with him, he was an ego belligerent jerk. People hated him with a passion. That was blocked creative energy that made him almost impossible to be around. It's intense. I tell my ones, even if you know what your creative edge is and you're doing it every day, ones still need to move their bodies. They need daily exercise because they have to move that energy. They have to, otherwise they'll just explode. They're so intense.
Yeah, that's okay. That's super interesting. All right. Let's move on to fours. What are fours here?
I love fours. Fours are like my little builders. They're very practical, pragmatic. They're like business people. Super, super business oriented, very logical. They're always in their head. They can have a little fear and anxiety here and there. But the crazy thing about fours is that they have to go one step at a they're like building a tower, one floor at a time, one floor at a time, one floor at a time. But they hate that, Casey, because they have no patience. They have no patience. So they can't skip steps, and they want to skip steps. But if they skip steps, they fall all the way down. And they're always the ones. They come to me and they're like, I just want to know, when am I going to get married? How's it going to happen? How is it going to be 2 years? I need to know, because they want the outcome. They just want to know when the outcome is. And I'm like, you know what? Slow down there, because you don't get to know the outcome. Anybody else, like fives are magical, eights are magical. They can create anything they want instantly. But a four, your life has a process, and you have to go slow and steady, one step at a time, and you can't skip steps. You have to be in the moment. You have to shut down your head. You can't do what you think you should do. You have to do what feels right. I have to make decisions based on how things feel. I'm on the highway of life. I want to get to exit 100, but I'm hungry. I'm going to get off at exit 22 and have a sandwich. And all of a sudden I meet the man of my dreams here, and I stay there for 2 years. But wait, I thought I was going to exit 100, but no, now I listened in the moment and I want to do something else. Mm-hmm. So fours have to go slow and steady, always listening to their intuition. And if they can do that, and if they can fight the wanting to know where they're going to be and try to get there faster, their life, instead of getting to exit 100 on the highway of life, they will end up at exit 200. By far better than they ever thought, but they would have gotten there. It will take time, and they'll have to be in the moment to listen to their intuition, but it'll always be far better, far better. So their life has a process to it. Mm-hmm. And so they can get a little frustrated because they're always the ones that have to know the answers. And I'm like, you know what? Your life's not about the outcome. It's about the process you take to get there. So settle down.
I love it. Okay. All right. So fives, which is another one of mine.
Oh, yeah. Fives are the complete opposite. Fives are all about freedom. They're the most adventurous people they can be. They're very curious. They want experiences. They just want to do everything, see everything. They almost don't care about the money. They just want the experience. And so they cannot sit at a desk job 9 to 5. They will blow their brains out. They can't do it. And so they never work for people. If they're doing well, they recognize they have to do their own thing. They just have to. And so they become consultants, or they can become, travel photographers, international correspondents. They're my exciting people. Very curious, right? They want to see the world. But the problem with that is that they can lack discipline and focus because they want to do everything and see everything. And so as a job, there'll be like 7 things that they want to do. And they can be so good at them, but like they're not supposed to do 7 things. They're supposed to call it down and do 1 or 2 things. They have to learn to go deeper. If they go deeper, if they learn to go deeper, then they won't be bored, because going deeper means you can push out in different directions and have different experiences. But 5s have this fear of boredom. So they want to do many things, but then they exhaust themselves in adrenal exhaust, and then nothing gets done. So they're a little unorganized. They're a little all over the place if they're not doing well. If they are doing well, they can make commitments. They're not afraid of routine, and they go deeper, not broader. So because they can become a little bit of a jack of all trades, master of none, if they're not careful. And so their work is to go deeper, not broader. It's a freedom that they're looking for, which is why they distract themselves into doing many things. But the real freedom they're looking for isn't an external freedom, it's an inner freedom. They're really looking for the freedom to be who they are, a freedom from fear, a freedom from self-doubt. That's what they're really looking for. And if they're doing well, they can create a company or create something, and they go deeper, and they can make commitments. Whenever I meet a 32-5 that isn't doing well and it's male, they're usually the cheats, because they're like, the 5 can't commit. Because they need stimulation all the time, they tend to track their own drama. 32-5s tend to track drama, or they'll make a commitment when they finally decide they want to commit. They commit, but then they pick somebody who will create drama just to keep them on their toes. And so they can, if they're not doing well, they'll have commitment issues. But, they're fiercely independent. And so they'll get into a relationship and they're like, I'm independent, don't pin me down. And then all of a sudden they become dependent on the person. And it's like they flop back and forth. And then they get mad that they're dependent on you. And then they pull back. You're suffocating me. I got to get out of here. And it's like, all right, you got some work to do.
Yeah. That I think the 2 and the 5 is another interesting combination because of the like boundary, independent thing. Like, it's just, I don't know. That seems like the 2s, like a gotcha.
Well, it is, because the 2s, if the 2's not doing well, 2s, like, so 1s make the best addicts, right? With that blocked creative energy. 2s make the best codependents. And the 5s, so the 2 can be a codependent. And then if you've got the 5 swings from independence to dependence. So it's the dependency aspect of the 2 and 5. When they start dancing in your interplay report, when I give you that deeper level, then you can start seeing how things really show up. But that's a level deeper for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's super interesting.
Do you know, there's one thing I did want to mention if people are going to calculate their lessons. I want to just mention that if you get a 0 in your equation, and it would be like 30/3 or 20/2, 0 always magnifies whatever number it's next to. So you're going to have a double hit of it. It's like you have it twice. But in the example of 30/3 or 20/2, because the 0 magnifies, let's look at the 3. It magnifies the 3, but you already have the 3 twice. So in life, you only have 1 life lesson, and you have it 3 times, and it would be the 3 or the 2.
Wow.
So you really have to know what that lesson is.
Yeah.
It's super, super important, and it can make you really intense because you only have 1 life lesson. And if you don't get it, the longer it takes you to get it, those are the ones that suffer hard even more. So that's important. And then that 0 also brings up, again, these are deeper levels. If it's 30/3 on a deeper level, they're going to have a hidden 6. 20/2 will have a hidden 4. Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay. And then I think, can you have 4 numbers versus 3?
There's only one composition that's 4 numbers. It's 3/9/12. And I happen to have that composition. And it's an exceedingly challenging one. because there's 4 unique lessons. And so they're all competing with each other. But it's the only one. You can have 2911 or 3811. Now, the 11 is the master set. So 11, 22, 33, 44, these are old souls. Not that we're not old souls. It's just that these people, if you're an 11, a 22, a 33, a 44, you're here on a path of mastery. All that means is that whatever you've done in past lives, this is the lifetime to make it big. So you kind of, as you grow and evolve, listening to your intuition for signs, always, all of us need to do that, then you'll find your life's work. Don't push yourself to decide you're a master, you have to do something fabulous. It will just naturally evolve. And that will be whatever your interests and passions are. And that's the work you're here to deliver on. So you talk to Aaron and Paul are 2 of my absolute favorite beings in the world. They're both master 2911s. So they know what their life's work is. But then likewise, they're either in the master 11, which they both are, and or they will realize they're either in the mastery of the 11 or they're in the double insecurity of that 1. You see how that works?
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
So in essence, they really only have 3 numbers because 1's duplicated. 3912 is the only one where there's 4 numbers.
Okay. Wow. That's super interesting. Okay. So then speaking of ways that you can go deeper into it, so you can then also compare your numbers to like another person's and understand like that there's a lesson between those 2 people. Is that how it works? Totally.
So when you get into a relationship, you can look at because I offer that interplay report, which is a level deeper. It's a general, it explains like your 32.5, who you are. If you want to see it with your boyfriend, you'd run his interplay report. So now you know your 3 lessons, he'll figure out his 3 lessons. But then the relationship has its own lesson. So sometimes clients sit with me and they're going on about this issue. And, I've done a meditation on them, so I kind of know what's going on with them. And I've done their numbers and I'm like, okay, this pattern's not yours. And then I'm like, well, what's your boyfriend's birthday? And I sit and I'm like, okay, that's not his lesson either. But when I run the relationship lesson, it's the relationship lesson. So you may not have the lesson, he may not have the lesson, but it's the lesson of the relationship.
Oh my gosh, the lessons just keep on coming.
It is. But here's the thing. If you know if you keep your side of the street clean and you know what your lessons are, then you can turn around, own what's yours. Then you can give the rest back because you could be like, dude, this is my stuff. That is definitely your lesson. So you go fix that. And then if you figure out that it's the lesson of the relationship, you're both responsible for that. But to help you understand the 2 a little more, because you're the one who may have in past lives, you've had relationships that were imbalanced. So you're here, you're heightening yourself. So you're like, okay, I'm bringing that 2 forward because I got to work on these relationships. I've got to find balance. And so you come into this life to find balance. There was a whole point that I wanted to bring up with that. So if I have a client who's sitting in front of me and I don't work with couples together, but if I did, I would say, okay, I don't want to hear he said, she said. I just want to know who is the 2. Because I'm going to start with you. Because if your job is to find balance in the relationship and to set boundaries, I want to know what you're doing to do that. Because if you set that foundation by deciding the boundary to find the balance, then I can go after them for what they're responsible for. So 2 is really,
the relationship lesson kind of starts with the 2.
If you have a 2, if you have a 2 in a relationship, the responsibility is going to be with you to set a boundary because 2s can over cooperate. They get walked on, taken for granted, taken advantage of. So if they don't do their work and if they don't set that boundary, then it's going to cause all kinds of problems with the other person because the other person is a soul contract, most likely to push that button of yours. Years ago, with my ex-fiance, like I literally had that lesson of boundaries and I thought I had worked on it, but it was subtle. There were little things that I kept giving that I shouldn't have been giving. But he and I made a contract, before this life. The way it works is that, I say to him, look, I've got this lesson to find balance in relationships. Can you help me with it? And he says, yeah, Donnalynn, I'll help you, but you've been a mess with this finding balance in relationships. So I'll make a 2-year contract with you. But if we do this, it's going to be hard because you're at the higher end of the higher stakes of this. And he's like, just remember, he would have said in the ethers, just remember, I love you. It's going to be hard. So then when I'm 24 years old, he rocks up into my life. We have 2 years to play out that contract for me to learn boundaries. So the hope is, Casey, is that I'm the highest version of myself. And so I'm going to say to him before I meet him, I need you to be so handsome, so charming, so supportive of my work. I need to fall for you, hook, line, and sinker. And then 3 months later, I need you to start changing and becoming a little bit of a jerk and a little avoidance, a little meanness, a little emotional abuse. The hope is I see that so quickly early on that I say, I don't know who you think you are. You are not going to treat me like that. There's the door. I want you to leave. If I do that, I get the lesson. If I do it within those 2 years, because that's my sole contract, I only have a 2-year contract. If I can do that, I move up the tree closer to having everything I want. So the next relationship I get is going to be a higher branch soul because I want to be at the top of my tree, right? And so now I didn't win the war. I'm going to have this lesson my whole life, but I won the battle. So I move up a bit. And so the next time the lesson will still show up, but it'll be easier. But if in those 2 years I don't learn how to set boundaries with that too, and I let him abuse me, I fall down the tree. Now I fall down the tree because the universe comes in and it says, look, Mark, Michael, whoever you are, thank you. But, in that, as soon as 2 years comes up, the universe intervenes, the lesson, the contract's over. And it says, yeah, thanks, Michael. You couldn't help her learn the lesson. So thank you for your efforts, but she desensitized to you. We have to get rid of you. We have to throw in somebody new because she no longer gets the lesson, right? So they get rid of him. And how would they get rid of him? They throw in another woman. And so he falls in love with her. And he moves on. And 6 months later, he gets married. And I'm madder than hell. Because I gave up everything for you. I sacrificed so you could go to med school. My family hated you, and I stuck up for you, and I put myself at a disadvantage for you. But was I supposed to do that? No. That was my lesson.
That was the lesson. That was the opportunity to setting boundaries, and you didn't do that. Yeah.
And I didn't do it. So now I slide down the tree. He moves on. He won. He did his part. He did exactly. And my friends hate him. My family hates him. But he did exactly what he was supposed to do. And now he gets rewarded. He meets his primary soulmate. They get married. And I'm angry and I fall down the tree. And I'm pissed as anything. And so now I'm going to get a lower branch person and I'm going to have to repeat the lesson. You see how that works?
Yeah, but was there a lesson he was learning from you as well?
For
or is it
sure.
Kind of like one lesson?
No. He and I would have had contracts for him as well.
Yeah.
And it would depend on where he was.
Right.
So I'm just giving it from my perspective, but we make joint. And he has a fear of control, a fear of intimacy. Let's say he had a fear of something else. He would be working on those things too. I actually wrote a book about this. It's called Life Lessons, Everything You Ever Wished You Learned in Kindergarten. You can get it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, but it explains this process really well. And then I tell stories from my life too, so you can get it.
So have you done past life regressions?
I have. I don't do too well with that because visualization is not one of my favorites. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't tend to love past life regression, but
you've kind of just figured this out by looking at the patterns in this current life to be like, okay, this is what I learned from this person.
So I know my numbers. I've decoded my numbers, but I also work with teachers that basically they help me decode because they see my life much clearer, and I've been learning from them how to do this process with clients.
Okay.
So I don't really do it with past life regression. I do it through a series of decoding. Yeah. And Gene Keys is part of it, and my psychic abilities are part of it. So it's like a whole package.
Yeah. That's super interesting. No, I love it.
Yeah.
And for anyone who's having a hard time following all the contracts and like making these agreements in the ethers, like read the book, Many Lives, Many Masters. Cause that's
totally.
And I've mentioned this book probably on like 18 podcast episodes at this point in time, but it really did completely open my mind to multiple lives. And then, the fact that we are helping each other learn and the soul pods, and there's always a lesson, and it just makes everything bigger and more exciting. And then of course it's easy, you forget all that and get lost in the weeds of life. And
totally.
It's helpful to kind of come back to be like, okay, there's bigger things happening.
And
right
you know
now.
what, Casey, honestly, I think the book that explains soul contracts so perfectly and in such easy language, like it was written by a marketing consultant. Like these two books, I think, are phenomenal. It's his name is Robert Schwartz, and it's called Your Soul's Plan and then Your Soul's Gift. He has two books, but he talks about the soul contracts that we make with other people. And then he also decodes things like addiction, betrayal, rape, all, handicapped. These are all soul contracts. And he decodes them and explains why you would choose to have these sort of contracts, what you're meant to learn. So it's phenomenal, all about soul contracts. Yeah, I would look at those two
definitely
books.
check out those two books.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to close out quickly, just talking a little bit about kind of these life cycles, so that in addition to the lessons we have here to learn, we're also, depending on the year, in like a certain part of a bigger cycle. Is that correct?
Yes. Everything is quantum, right? And so there's 9-year life cycles. So when I teach people, like right now I'm doing a Decoding Your Life immersion, a 4-part series where I teach you the 9-year life lessons, and then I teach you the 9-year life cycles. So you can figure out what year you're in and, what that means for you. Because every year it offers something slightly different, and not everybody understands. So you always kind of want to know what year you're in.
Okay. I love that. And I must have seen this or read this somewhere, but is the pattern of that cycle, is it a spiral? Is there something about a spiral?
Well, I mean, all the numerics are a spiral. Our whole lives and our experiences are literally, they mirror our DNA. They're all spirals. They're all binary codes. So if you look at it like, if you get the lesson, you move up the spiral. If you don't get the lesson, I use the analogy of a tree, but if you don't learn, then you spiral down. Literally, that's where spiral came from as a reference. We have to look at nomenclature and words, because words really explain a lot to us. If you don't learn, they're like, oh, he really spiraled. He spiraled down.
Yeah.
Well, because you would go down in a helix, so because it's part of the spiral. Everything is a spiral.
Okay. I love that. I learned about the Fibonacci spiral a couple years ago and just fell in love with it, and just the whole concept of growth. And then, I don't know, then I saw something about a spiral when I was like learning about Kabbalah, and that it's like, I don't know, it's just, a spiral keeps showing up in all these cool places that I'm like, oh, there's totally something to this.
Yeah. Spiral, to me, you can look at a spiral like a calendar. It's and I know that's kind of, it's difficult to understand, but everything is set up on a spiral line. You're either evolving forward, upwards, or you're de-evolving downwards. And it's not really linear. It's more as a spiral. Which
is why I think even the evolving upwards at times can feel like you're not making progress, or like you're going backwards, even though it is still.
It's gradual. Forward. Yeah. It's like a 4. It has to do it gradually.
Yeah.
Slow and steady.
Oh, yeah. I love it. Thank you so much for coming on and explaining all this. It's so much richer than I thought it was going to be completely honest. And I love kind of just the synergy between, Gene Keys and human design and all that. I'll link to those episodes in the show notes as well as your book and the books we've mentioned. But tell everybody where they can find you, hear more about your work, your book, the different readings and groups that you do, all that stuff.
Oh, sure. So my website is www.ethereal-wellness.com. So that will talk about my intuitive numerology coaching sessions. I also offer 10% if anybody wants to do a private session with me. But that's an aside. Next Tuesday, the 28th, I'm actually doing a small group numerology circle. So I only take a few people, and I give you your numerology report. I give you the report for somebody you want to know more about. So it could be your boyfriend, girlfriend. It could be your mother, your boss, your best friend. And then I give you the relationship report. So you get 3 reports. And then we do it online on Zoom, and everybody gets to know each other's numbers, and then we all learn about the numbers. So it's so much fun. And it's also part of an intuitive reading. So you can ask me personal questions, and if the information's in the field for you, I can give it to you. So that's next Tuesday. And also, if you're just interested in getting a quick and dirty reading of your numbers, you can get that little life lesson interplay report. It's on my website. You can check that out. And yeah, you would just DM me and I could send it to you. It's not a problem. And those are pretty inexpensive. They're like $35 each. But all the information is there, and you can check out Amazon for my book, Life Lessons, Everything You Ever Wished You Learned in Kindergarten.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you so much. This was super insightful.
Oh, and I forgot. If you go to udemy.com, I have an online numerology masterclass that will actually teach you, and it's like $10. It's like nothing. It will teach you how to calculate your lessons, and then it'll go through all 9 of them. And then it'll do the upfront part. It'll also talk about where these life lessons come from, who dishes them up to you, because, we pick our life lessons, then we pick the souls who are going to dish them up to us, the soul contracts we're going to make, and when they're going to show up. And then we pick our parents, because the seeds of our life lessons are planted in childhood, and we spend the rest of our life overcoming it. And then, we wake up on Earth and we forget all of it. It's called spiritual amnesia. We have to forget, because if we knew, we would have nothing to do here.
Yep.
So so that's on udemy.com.
Cool. I will try and find that and link that to the show notes as well. Awesome. So much good stuff. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. I really enjoyed this. Thank you.
All right. That will do it for this week. Thank you again for listening. Please, birthday present to me and the podcast, leave a rating or review on whatever platform you are listening on, or post it on your socials and tag me at the Better You Podcast so that I see that you've done so and I can enjoy that birthday present. If you want to be connected with Donnalynn to do a private session with a 10% discount, or if you need help in figuring out what your numbers are, then do not hesitate to reach out to me at thebetteryouPodcast@gmail.com. I will gladly help with both of those. And let's see what else. I guess, follow the podcast on the socials. We are on Instagram and Facebook at The Better You Podcast. And I think that's it. Make sure you are subscribed so that you don't miss all the wonderful conversations we've got coming up. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day and your week.